Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react.
Jen, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. You are a repeat guest. We're so glad to have you. You know, you came and talked about... Oh, yes. Thank you, Sean.
I got a button. I want to push it. I think so. That was the button.
You joined us during our drug development series, and you talked about the role of the patient in clinical trials. Well, really about clinical trials in general. And then you joined us on one of our most popular episodes ever. After Skyclarys was approved, you and Bruce told the origin story, which was super, super cool. So I encourage listeners to go back and check those out. But thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me back.
You're the CEO of the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. What does that entail? What is your job at FARA?
And the exciting part is working with the board and our leadership team to really set our strategy. You know, what is it that FARA can do, should do, that's going to continue to advance the mission, bring treatments forward for FA? What are the most important things we can be doing that's going to make the biggest difference? And, you know, setting that strategy and then making sure that the programs we have in place, whether that's our grant program or our clinical research consortium or our advocacy initiatives or our patient engagement, our ambassador, like all of our programs are executing towards that strategy. And are we putting the right resources and programs in place to execute that? And that's really what I think my role and responsibility is.
In a previous episode, you told us about how you started at a clinic at CHOP, working with Dr. Dave Lynch. And you've been in the FA field for a long time, the rare disease community. And so how have things changed in the landscape for rare disease since you've been involved?
I think in terms of both FA and rare disease, there's so much more attention in the context of being able to develop treatments. So, 25 years ago, there weren't pharmaceutical companies with rare disease programs. There weren't, even at the academic institutions where I was working, rare disease was not commonly discussed. And it was, and they weren't given a lot of attention, I don't think. And, that I think has completely changed. There's a drive, there's an interest, both at the academic level as well as the industry level, to be involved in rare disease, because it's been demonstrated now that we can be successful in research and developing treatments. And so there's a lot more optimism and a lot more engagement. And I think we've also got the success stories to kind of prove that out, right? There's been real success, not just in FA with our first approved treatment this year, but in other rare diseases. And that's what, I think has continued to drive that engagement and interest, and focus on rare disease as a place where we can develop real and meaningful therapies.
You mentioned that there is a path to success. We've discovered that over the last 25 years. And the biggest example in the FA world, of course, is Skyclarys, which you mentioned. We have our first approved treatment. Skyclarys was approved February 2023. It's almost a year later. Looking back on the last year, what have been the most empowering things for you, and what have been the challenges, the biggest challenges?
I think in terms of, rewarding things, that goes back to your question about, 25 years ago when I got started in FA and rare disease compared to today. You know, where I was when I started my career and started working with the FA community, we had a breakthrough. The gene had been identified, and we could now diagnose FA. And with genetic testing, could be conclusive about that. Could really, you know, provide people with a concrete, accurate diagnosis. But beyond that, you know, we couldn't offer any treatment. And for me, as a genetic counselor and being in this community for 25 years, to know that now when somebody is diagnosed with FA, we no longer have to say there are no approved treatments.
Yeah.
So we never want to give anybody this diagnosis, but when we have to, we now get to tell them that there is an approved treatment, and we have that knowledge and success to continue building on for the future.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that to me is really rewarding. And I hope that changes the experience for people who become newly diagnosed, you know, in these upcoming years. There are the obvious rewarding things too, like hearing people's stories, right? You know, whether it's on social media or we've recently had families testifying at state Medicaid meetings to help promote access to Skyclarys, the new approved treatment. And, you know, hearing people's stories about their experience being on this new medication, even modest improvements, right, are huge because this is a progressive disease. You're not expected to have any improvement.
Right.
And so those are obviously incredibly rewarding. But the other rewarding aspect of this, and that I hope the community realizes, is that this is kind of the proof of principle that we've all been working towards, right? That the programs and the strategies and all the things we've been doing to try and get treatments approved works, right? We fund the basic science, and that leads to drug discovery. And we invest in drug development tools, animal models, cell models. We invest in clinical research infrastructure, right? Having sites where we can do research and having natural history data and biomarkers, and, you know, having the FA community engaged and participating in research, that, you know, every contribution to research counts, and being advocates makes a difference. You know, this story of the approval to Skyclarys is all of those. And it was all of those things that got this drug approved. It wasn't just one. And, you know, the first time you do something, it's always the hardest. And hopefully now, you know, we've demonstrated that we can get a treatment approved, and hopefully we can do it again, and we can do it again, and, you know, to get to the ultimate goal. And so that to me is the other really rewarding piece of this. And if we can share it with the rest of the rare disease community, that's also been rewarding. I think this fall I was invited to talk at least 6 different rare disease meetings.
Wow.
To share our learnings so that hopefully others can benefit from that.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. The more we pay it forward, the more it helps the whole community and even us. So you talked about the rewarding things. What have been the challenging things about Skyclarys? Well, and just about where we are as a community and as an organization.
Yeah. There are always challenges, right? Otherwise, and opportunities to do more. Otherwise, I'd be retired, right?
Right.
So, I think one thing that's been challenging has been, this first approved treatment, it's approved in the U.S. by the Food and Drug Administration for individuals with FA 16 and older. So that automatically means, well, what about if you don't live in the United States? How do you access this treatment? And what if you are not yet 16? How do you access this treatment? And so already right out of the gate, we've got a situation where there are people who have and people who have not. And that's been a big concern of mine since even before the drug got approved. Just knowing that the process and the way things are going to occur, you're always going to, at any point in time, have people who are going to have access and people who are not.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. And we're continuing to work on that and making good progress. It doesn't happen overnight, but as long as we're continuing to expand access and move globally, we can address these challenges. And then, working with Biogen, the company that, markets Skyclarys, working with them towards pediatric trials and, meeting the unmet need in our population is important, but it doesn't happen instantaneously. And so that's challenging. Mm-hmm. And I think the other challenge is this is a treatment, right? It's not a cure. And what we want is a cure, right? Sure. We want to stop and reverse FA. We don't, if given early, we don't want people to ever have symptoms. And for people who have symptoms, we want to completely halt the disease and hopefully improve function and outcomes. And this drug is a treatment in that, it does a little bit of that, but not all of that. It can improve neurologic function. It can improve fatigue. It can slow the progression of the disease, but it's not going to completely stop or reverse it. And so we still have more work to do.
Right.
And so I think another challenge is kind of what we say, managing expectations and helping everybody really understand what the treatment is, what it means. Because I think, that when you say treatment to somebody, when I say the word treatment, Kyle, what comes to mind for you might not be the same thing that comes to mind for Sean or comes to mind for me or anybody else.
Right. Yeah. All right. So you talked about the process and some of the different roles. The clinician has a role, the academic scientist, the industry partner, the advocacy organization. And oftentimes as a patient, I feel like there's this concept of, we're waiting for a cure. And I really don't like that, because all of us know there's so much we can do and we're an essential part. What would you say are the pieces, the responsibilities that the patient can play in the process?
Well, Paul Avery, our board chair, very early on, always said, everybody's got a piece of the puzzle to play when it comes to FARA's mission. And that means individuals with FA, that means our donors, that means, our researchers. Kyle, to your point, everybody's got a piece of the puzzle, and they need to play it. And I truly believe that. I think it's a great analogy, and I think it reinforces your point, right? That there is something everybody can contribute. And that's not going to be the same, though, for every person, depending on where they are in their FA journey, as well as what's going on in their life outside FA. But I think some things that people can do and should do, what I take for myself, right? When I'm faced with a medical challenge, what are some of my responsibilities to advocate for myself? I have to become informed. What is this thing that I have? And what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my family? Am I have I gotten the right information? All of those kinds of things. So being informed, I think is important. And I think that's a responsibility that the individual needs to own. And it's easier said than done, but it is a responsibility. And then, as much as people are able to be active and contribute, that's what's going to move us forward faster. If everybody sits back and waits for somebody else to move,
Yeah.
What's the point?
yeah, where are we going?
Yeah.
So I don't think we have the luxury of everybody in the community kind of taking that wait and see.
Somebody else will do it.
Yeah.
No, that's not the way it works.
No, and if everybody has that kind of mentality, or if people feel like, oh, I can't make the worst thing is somebody thinking that they can't make a meaningful contribution, that they don't see that their contribution's meaningful, and so they hold back. That I feel is sad for them, and it's also sad for the community, because we know the more we all contribute, whether it's raising funds at a fundraiser, to put more money forward for research, or going to a natural history study visit and contributing your data, or signing up for a clinical trial, whatever it is, it moves the ball forward, and it moves it forward faster.
Some people, I assume, automatically put a filter on those things and say, oh, I can't do that. So there's a tendency to not necessarily sit back and wait and see, but maybe feel I don't have value to offer. So I'm curious, and either one of you can talk to this, but how would you encourage somebody in that boat who maybe they're old or they're young, or their limitations are harder or different than somebody that they see online? Like you said, and I think we all believe it, everybody has a part to play, but how do you encourage somebody specifically that thinks that they're too late to the game?
Well, there's that. And I think also the other challenge is, for a lot of people, when they receive this diagnosis, they are specifically told there's nothing you can do. So you're told by a healthcare professional, there's nothing you can do. And then you're facing this huge, scary challenge that you didn't ask for, you didn't want. I imagine that a lot of the place you start from in this journey is not one of empowerment. Sure. So to your point, how do you change that? How do you go from feeling really disempowered to feeling empowered?
Yeah. I think of some of the things that we've talked about before, just being a good friend, building community, reaching out to other people who might be having a really tough time, and doing small things, but recognizing that those aren't as small as they might seem. And just building community and helping other people along the way, I think, is a powerful thing. So in general, I think it's recognizing and changing the perspective that all these things, that you do have the power, even in the small things that you're able to do.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot again. Again, either one of you. We've talked either here and in the past, everybody always talks about building community, quote unquote.
Okay.
How in the world do we do that? At a very baseline, for that listener who just got diagnosed last week or a month ago, how do they build community? What does that look like for them?
I think it looks like a phone call. Hey, I heard you were
You're an old man. Phone call? What's that?
a text message?
Word.
A DM? Is that a thing?
I don't know.
But reaching out and connecting, I think, is a big part of community, right? And just helping other people realize that they're valued and they're seen. That's not very specific, but I think that's a big part of it.
It's a place to start.
I think what I've heard from other folks in the FA community that has been meaningful for them in terms, and I think community again can mean different things, right? You're building your FA community versus, building your local support system, your family, your extended family kind of community, depending on where you are. But I think, I think for a lot of folks, it was realizing, oh, wait, I'm not alone. And that's the story we hear from other people, that once they've made that connection to somebody else who's been diagnosed with FA and heard their story and connected with them personally, what it's meant for them, that's that kind of opening the door, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel kind of moment.
For sure.
And I think once you've experienced that, and all of us have, then you have a responsibility, and you feel a responsibility, I think, to pay it forward to somebody else who maybe hasn't felt that and seen that light at the end of the tunnel. And then maybe they'll feel responsibility to pay it forward to someone else. And I think, that's what community building is, and realizing that could happen. If we do it enough over and over and over again, then we start to build a community.
And when I say community, I also think it's not just individuals with FA and their family members, right? That are important members of the community and important contributors to the community. When I say FA community, I'm also including our researchers and our clinicians and our industry partners, right? The other stakeholders are other advocacy organizations. And because I truly believe we need all the types, all the stakeholders to support one another. When you're building your local community of support, you're pulling together people with different qualities and different attributes, right? Because they bring different things to your community that make your community more rich and more robust, or, help you in different ways. And so when I think FA community, in my mind, that's all those different stakeholders that we need and want working together.
I was thinking about it too, and you talk about what Paul Avery, or the way you put it. If everybody plays their piece of the puzzle, even though that piece might be small, might be some obscure piece of the blue sky, that's half the puzzle or whatever, you never know what that could lead to. That might lead to the next researcher in 20 years who cures cancer or cures whatever the big issue or concern may be. You never know who you might meet along the way, and eventually they play a significant part at some degree.
Yep.
Yeah, and maybe that happens. But if you don't place that piece, it surely does not, right?
Yep.
As a leader in the rare disease community and the leader of a rare disease organization, what keeps you up at night? What are the challenges that are going to be really tough in the future?
There are different kinds of things that keep you up at night, right? There are the good dreams and the bad dreams, right? Both of them can keep you up at night. I think the ones that make me stay up and make me sweat a little go back to what I was talking about before with this first approval. One of the challenges being that there are people in the community that can access the treatment and people who can't. And the consequence of that, or one of the consequences of that, could be fractionation in our community. And that really keeps me up at night. It really worries me, because I think one of the key strengths and strongest attributes of our FA community, and one of the reasons we've had success in the time that we've had success, is because we are united and we are all working together. And in some other rare disease communities, we've seen where they've fractionated, and there are groups that are not working together and they don't get along. And we don't have that kind of, we can't afford that negative process or energy,
Yeah.
you know? If we're spending energy working against each other,
Right.
that's energy we're not putting into working towards what's going to be helpful to all of us. But I think it's human nature.
Right.
And so in some ways it's really hard to avoid that. But Ron Bartek, our founder, has worked really hard from the very beginning to, make sure that everyone in the community has a voice and it's heard, and that we make room for everybody, and that we work together, that we not create silos, whether that's in the research community or the patient community. We don't have to all agree, but we have to continue to work together and not against each other. And so I think when and I've heard this from other rare disease organizations where there's been fractionation in their community, it typically stems when there are some folks who have access to treatments and others don't.
Yeah.
And so that keeps me up at night, and is a big concern for me right now. One of the good challenges, one of the good dreams, is thinking about the next treatment and the next one. And, how do we continue to evolve our approach to clinical trials and developing combination therapies, and, what's the work we need to do to be able to do the next clinical trial and kind of meet those challenges now that we have one approved therapy.
Could you educate me and maybe some of our listeners? We know, at least in the FA world, people are diagnosed before they're 12 typically. And a lot of rare diseases present themselves in small children or infants. So what does the process look like for getting approval for under the age of 16? You don't have to get into all the details, but for somebody like me that has no clue, what does that mean? What do we have to do?
And it isn't one size fits all. So
Sure.
that's part of the challenge. But obviously when there are regulations in place in the US and in other countries, right, for when you're testing any kind of new medicine, drug, medical device. There are rules and regulations around trying to ensure safety, as well as in the case of young children, right? They can't provide consent to the risks that they might be facing by being tested or being part of a clinical trial for a medicine that might have, unknown risks.
Sure.
And so, how do you protect children from some of the potential risks and preserve some autonomy for a child? Like there are all kinds of ethical concerns that come into play, but the rules and regulations are kind of meant to help us navigate some of those challenges. And so, you need to be able to test the drug not only in preclinical models, you might also first have to test it in healthy adults, right? Before you can test it in children, just to know what the safety risks might be. In the case of our FA community, where there's an adult population, in addition to a pediatric population, the regulatory authorities are going to want you to first test in adults and understand the safety in adults before you move to kids. But it doesn't mean you have to get the drug approved in adults before you can go to kids. It just means you need to understand what the potential risks are, so that you can have a better, risk-benefit understanding. And then you can, advocate. If the potential benefit would outweigh the risks, then you can go to children because they are a more vulnerable population. So that was kind of I didn't answer that very succinctly, but it's
not easy.
It's not, but none of it's easy.
Sure.
But there are things that that we can do and address. Like you can do the juvenile toxicology studies, you can do the initial safety studies in adults, and then move forward with, advancing trials in kids. At the same time, you're doing trials in adults. It doesn't have to be one after the other at every single step. But it's about, really understanding what the potential risks are and making sure that the potential benefit's going to outweigh the risk when there's a more vulnerable population like children.
Thank you.
Yep.
A few minutes ago, you talked about being able to focus on what's next. So can you share a little bit what is on the radar for FA, for FARA, for your kids, whatever you want to talk about? What are we looking forward to?
We're excited about the opportunity to partner with Biogen to, work with them to expand access globally. So Canada and Australia and South America and India and like all the other places where we know we need to help people get access. And we also need to start pediatric trials. And so those are, really important to FARA. And so we've got a number of initiatives ongoing this year, both with our drug development partners to try and help them, bridge some of the gaps that need to be bridged to be able to do pediatric studies, but also thinking about, what's the work we can do with our government partners, the regulatory agencies. Do they have the adequate support and resources that they need to help us transition to pediatric trials quickly and effectively? Or are there, updates, changes to the regulations that need to be made to promote pediatric studies, especially in the context of rare diseases? And so, those are things that I think we're looking forward to. We do, have an active treatment pipeline. And so there are other drugs that are currently in clinical trials and other ones that we're looking forward to moving from that preclinical stage of research to clinical development. So I think this year we're going to be focused on, getting up and rolling a number of studies, and then, for our treatments that are in the pipeline in active studies, moving them to their next milestone. So we've got lots of different programs that we're working on and trying to keep them all going forward, moving. Yeah. Keep everybody, as Kyle says, everybody pedaling.
Yep. Every pedal stroke counts. Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a little window into your world. We really appreciate your time here today, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, John. It's been fun.
Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This show is possible with your support. Visit twodisableddudes.com to stay connected.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player.